Right now, at this very moment, Santa Barbara County is being struck by a storm system that will remain over the region for several days. This isn't a quick passing shower or a single day of rough weather. What started over the weekend has already settled in, and what makes this different from anything residents have experienced in recent memory is that it's not going anywhere. 5 consecutive days of rain, wind, cold temperatures, and mounting flood concerns. And here's what you need to understand immediately. The worst impacts are still ahead. The National Weather Service has issued multiple warnings across the region, not just advisories or weather statements, but actual warnings that signal serious concern. Flood watches covering the valleys, high wind warnings for the coast and mountains, winter storm watches for the higher elevations, evacuation warnings for areas scarred by recent wildfires. This is not one threat. Multiple weather hazards are active at the same time across different parts of the region. If you live in Santa Barbara County or anywhere nearby, if you have family in the area, or if you're simply someone who pays attention to significant weather events unfolding across California, then stay with me. Over the next several minutes, we're going to walk through exactly what's happening right now, what's coming over the next few days, and why forecasters are saying the peak impacts haven't even arrived yet. What does a 5-day storm really mean for daily life? When will conditions be at their worst? What should people in different areas expect as this system continues to churn through the region? These are the questions everyone is asking, and these are the answers we're going to uncover together. You're not just getting headlines here, you're getting the full picture, the timeline, the reasons behind the warnings, and the practical understanding you need to make sense of what's unfolding. Because when a storm lasts this long and brings many different threats at the same time, staying informed helps you make better decisions during severe weather. So here's what I want you to do. If this information matters to you, if you're watching because you want to stay informed and understand what's really happening, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss updates as this situation continues to develop. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, especially if you're in Santa Barbara County or anywhere being affected by this storm. Let's build a community of informed, prepared people who look out for each other during events like this. Now, let's break down everything you need to know, starting with what's happening at this exact moment. As you're watching this, the storm is active. This is not a forecast for something that might happen later. This is the reality unfolding across Santa Barbara County right now, on Monday. Rain is falling, winds are blowing, temperatures are dropping, and multiple official warnings from the National Weather Service are in effect, covering different parts of the county and addressing different types of hazards. Let's start with the flood watch. This is serious language from forecasters, and it's important to understand what it means. A flood watch tells you that conditions are favourable for flooding to occur. It doesn't mean flooding is guaranteed everywhere, but it means the ingredients are in place. Heavy rainfall over an extended period, saturated ground that can't absorb much more water, creeks and streams that are already running high, urban areas where water has nowhere to go except across streets, and into low-lying neighbourhoods. All of these factors exist right now in Santa Barbara County, and they're not going away anytime soon. The wind situation is equally concerning, but it comes in 2 different levels depending on where you are. Some areas are under a high wind warning, which is the more serious of the two. Other areas are under a wind advisory. The difference matters. A warning means damaging winds are expected or already occurring. An advisory means winds will be strong enough to cause some problems, but not quite at the damaging level. Either way, if you're in Santa Barbara County today, you're dealing with wind that's more than just a stiff breeze. We're talking about sustained winds that make driving difficult, that rattle windows, that move loose objects that should be secured, and that combine with wet soil to threaten trees that might otherwise withstand the gusts. Now, let's talk about how we got here, because understanding the beginning of this storm helps you understand why it's lasting so long. This system didn't just appear overnight, it began moving into the area over the weekend. Sunday brought the first substantial rainfall. Sunday continued the pattern. And now Monday has arrived with the storm still firmly in place, still drawing moisture from the Pacific, still feeding itself with the conditions it needs to keep going. Weather systems usually move through California relatively quickly. A day of rain, maybe 2, then clearing skies and a return to normal. But this one is different. It's slow. It's stubborn. It's tapping into a steady stream of moisture that keeps replenishing it, and the forecast shows it maintaining strength well into the week. If you stepped outside this morning anywhere in the affected areas, you felt it immediately. The air is heavy with moisture. The sky is grey and low, with clouds that seem to press down rather than drift overhead. The rain isn't always a downpour. Sometimes it eases to a steady drizzle, but it never fully stops. That's the characteristic signature of this particular storm. It's relentless. Even when it seems to lighten up, it comes back, and that constant, persistent rainfall is what creates the cumulative effect that forecasters worry about. Day 1 brings manageable rain. Day 2 adds to what fell on day 1. Day 3 keeps building. By day 4 and 5, you're not just dealing with today's rainfall, you're dealing with the combined weight of everything that's fallen since the weekend, and the ground reaches its saturation point. The areas currently experiencing the heaviest impacts are predictable if you know the geography of Santa Barbara County. The coastal zones are experiencing strong winds. The inland valleys are seeing steady, soaking rain. The foothills are caught in between, getting both rain and wind in significant amounts. And the higher elevations, the mountains that rise above the valley floor, they're seeing conditions transition from cold rain to something else entirely, which we'll discuss in detail later. What you're hearing from residents who are posting on social media, who are calling into local news stations, who are sharing their experiences, it all tells the same story. Flooded streets in low-lying neighbourhoods, standing water in areas that usually drain quickly, tree branches down across roads, power outages starting to pop up in scattered locations as wind affects electrical infrastructure, creeks running high and muddy, parking lots with pools of water that weren't there yesterday. These are the visible signs that a storm is not just passing through, but settling in and making its presence felt in ways that compound hour by hour. The National Weather Service doesn't issue multiple warnings lightly. When you see a flood watch, wind warnings, and winter storm watches all active for the same region at the same time, it tells you something important about the complexity of what's happening. This isn't a simple rain event, it's a multi-threat system that demands attention across different elevation levels, different geographic zones, and different time frames. The people who study weather for a living, who analyse atmospheric patterns and model storm behaviour, they're telling us this is significant. Not because they want to create alarm, but because the data, the observations, and the forecast models all point to the same conclusion. This storm is here, it's strong, and it's far from finished. So that's where we are right now at this moment. Active warnings, ongoing impacts, a storm that started days ago and shows no sign of wrapping up. Here's what's particularly important to understand, the part that makes preparation and awareness especially important. Everything you're experiencing right now, all the rain and wind and grey skies that have been present since the weekend, this is not the peak. This is not the worst of it. What's happening right now is significant, but it's building towards something more intense. And that brings us to the question everyone needs answered. If this is what's happening on Monday, what's coming Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? When forecasters talk about a 5-day storm event, it's easy to hear those words without really grasping what they mean in practical terms. 5 days sounds like a long time in the abstract, but what does it actually look like when a storm system camps over a region for that duration? Let's walk through this timeline day by day, so you understand not just when things are happening, but why the length of this event matters so much. Sunday marked the beginning. The storm system moved in from the Pacific, bringing the first substantial rainfall to Santa Barbara County. For most people, Saturday felt like a typical winter storm day. Rain, clouds, cooler temperatures, nothing that seemed particularly unusual or threatening. It was the kind of weather that makes you change your outdoor plans, but not the kind that makes you worry. Sunday was the beginning of this weather event, when the storm system moved onshore and started affecting the region. Sunday continued the pattern, but with a bit more intensity. The rain became more persistent. The wind picked up. The sky stayed grey from morning until night. By Sunday evening, the ground was already saturated in many areas. Creeks were running higher than normal. People were starting to notice that this wasn't just a quick passing system, it had staying power. Sunday was when the first questions started forming. How long is this going to last? When does it clear out? And the forecast showed this would be an extended weather event. This is a multi-day event. It's not leaving anytime soon. Now we're on Monday, and this is where most of you are right now as you're watching this video. Monday is day 3 of the storm. The rainfall totals are already significant in many locations. The wind has been strong enough to cause scattered issues, and all the official warnings from the National Weather Service have been issued. Monday is the day when this storm stops feeling like normal winter weather and starts feeling like something more serious. It's the day when awareness turns into preparation, when casual attention turns into focused concern. because Monday is also the day when the forecast makes it clear that intensification is coming. Tuesday is when everything ramps up. This is the day forecasters have been pointing to as the beginning of the most intense period. The rainfall rates increase, the wind speeds climb, the temperatures drop noticeably, and critically the winter storm watch activates for the higher elevations, meaning snow begins to fall in the mountains while rain continues in the valleys. Tuesday is when the storm shows its full strength. It's no longer building, it's no longer warming up. Tuesday is when all the threats converge at once. And the impacts become impossible to ignore. Travel becomes hazardous. Flooding moves from potential to likely and vulnerable areas. Wind causes widespread problems rather than isolated incidents. Tuesday is the day when conditions become most intense. Wednesday continues the intensity. There's no break between Tuesday and Wednesday. The storm doesn't ease up overnight and give everyone a chance to catch their breath. Wednesday is essentially a continuation of Tuesday's conditions, which means 2 consecutive days of peak impacts, 2 days of heavy rain, 2 days of damaging winds, 2 days of cold temperatures and mountain snow. This is where the 5-day duration becomes so important. Most storm systems hit hard for 1 day, maybe into a second day, and then weaken. But this system maintains its strength across multiple days. The ground doesn't get a chance to drain, the trees don't get a break from the wind, the power crews don't get a window to restore electricity in calm conditions. Wednesday continues the challenging conditions with little relief between the 2 peak days. Thursday is complex. It's the day when conditions finally begin to ease, but that easing happens slowly and unevenly. The morning might still bring strong winds and heavy rain. By afternoon, things start to calm down. By evening, there's a noticeable improvement. Thursday is the transition day, the hinge between the worst of the storm and the return to normal. But here's what matters. Even as Thursday brings relief, it's still part of the 5-day event. It still contributes to the overall rainfall totals. It still matters for flood potential because the ground is absolutely saturated from the previous days. Thursday is when people start to feel hopeful that the end is near, but it's not a day to let your guard down completely. Friday is the light at the end of the tunnel. The storm system finally moves on. The rain tapers off and eventually stops. The wind calms to normal levels. The clouds begin to break apart. Friday is recovery day, the day when communities start assessing damage, clearing debris, restoring power, and returning to normal routines. But Friday is also a reminder of what just occurred. After 5 consecutive days of storm impacts, the landscape has changed. Waterways are still swollen, roads might still be flooded, power might still be out in some areas. Friday is when the storm ends, but the recovery begins. Now, here's why this 5-day timeline matters more than just knowing what day brings what weather. Most storms that hit California move through in a day or two. The state's infrastructure, its drainage systems, its power grid, its emergency response capabilities, they're all designed around that typical pattern. But a 5-day event is different. It creates sustained challenges for infrastructure and emergency systems. Rainfall that would be manageable over 2 days becomes overwhelming over 5. Wind that would cause minor problems for 1 day causes major problems when it blows for 5. Emergency crews that can respond effectively during a short storm become stretched thin during a long one, and people themselves, residents who can hunker down and deal with bad weather for a day or 2, they start to feel the strain when it goes on day after day after day without relief. The forecast models, the ones that meteorologists use to predict storm behaviour, they've been remarkably consistent about this timeline. That's important because forecast consistency gives us confidence. When models disagree wildly, you know there's uncertainty. But when they all show the same basic pattern, 5 days of storm impacts with the worst arriving midweek, you can plan around that information. You can trust it. And right now, as we sit on Monday looking ahead at Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, the forecast is telling us very clearly what to expect. The question isn't whether the storm will intensify. The question is whether you're ready for it when it does. Let's talk about rain and flooding, because this is the primary threat facing Santa Barbara County over these 5 days. When the National Weather Service issues a flood watch, they're not being casual about it. They're telling you that conditions favour flooding development and that you need to pay attention to your specific location and situation. First, let's understand what kind of rainfall we're dealing with here. This is not a situation where one intense downpour dumps everything in an hour and then moves on. That type of rain is dramatic and can cause flash flooding, but it's usually localised and short-lived. What's happening with this storm is different. It's persistent, moderate to heavy rainfall that continues hour after hour, day after day. The rates aren't always extreme, but the duration is what creates the problem. Think of it like a bathtub. If you turn the faucet on full blast, the tub fills quickly, but if you turn it on to a steady flow and leave it running for days, the tub still fills, and it might even overflow because the drain can't keep up with the constant input. The valley areas of Santa Barbara County are forecast to receive significant rainfall totals by the time this system finally moves out. We're not talking about a light soaking, we're talking about several inches of rain accumulated over 5 days. This represents a significant amount for the region, but remember, this is California. The state's Mediterranean climate means the ground, the drainage systems, and the infrastructure aren't built for prolonged periods of heavy rain like you'd see in the Pacific Northwest or the Southeast. When California gets days of steady rainfall, this amount requires attention in California's infrastructure systems. The mountain areas will see even higher totals. This is a consistent pattern in California storms. Higher elevations typically receive more rain because rising air cools and releases moisture as precipitation. So while the valleys might measure rainfall in single-digit inches, the mountains typically receive more precipitation than valleys. And that mountain rainfall matters even if you don't live in the mountains, because all that water has to go somewhere. It runs down slopes, fills creeks and streams, and eventually makes its way to the valleys below. Mountain rainfall today becomes valley flooding tomorrow. Flash flooding is a particular concern during this event, especially in the afternoons and evenings when rainfall rates tend to peak. Flash flooding is exactly what it sounds like. It happens quickly, without much warning, in areas that might not typically flood. Small creeks that are usually dry can fill quickly with fast-moving water. Streets in neighborhoods can experience significant water flow. Water levels can increase quickly in flash flood situations. This is why a flood watch is so important. It means you need to be aware of your surroundings, especially if you're near any kind of waterway or in a low-lying area. If you see water starting to accumulate, if a street that's usually fine suddenly has water flowing across it, don't assume it will stay at that level. Flash flooding can escalate quickly, and the time to move to higher ground is before the water gets deep, not after. Urban flooding is another major concern, and this affects even people who don't live near creeks or rivers. Cities and towns have storm drain systems designed to handle rainfall, but those systems have limits. When rain falls faster than the drains can handle, or when drains get clogged with debris, water backs up onto streets and into neighborhoods. Parking lots become ponds, intersections become impassable. Water creeps into homes through garages or ground-level doors. Urban flooding might not sound as dramatic as a river overflowing its banks, but it affects more people and causes significant disruption and damage. And when that urban flooding continues day after day, because the rain never stops long enough for drainage systems to catch up, the problems compound. The longer this storm lasts, the more the cumulative rainfall matters. This is a concept that's easy to overlook but critical to understand. The first day of rain might cause minor flooding in a few susceptible spots. The second day adds more water to ground that's already wet. The third day pushes things further. By day 4 and 5, even areas that handled the initial rainfall just fine start to have problems because there's simply nowhere for the water to go anymore. Soils are saturated, drainage systems are overwhelmed, creeks are at capacity, and any additional rain, even moderate amounts, can trigger flooding because the landscape has lost its ability to absorb or channel water effectively. Rivers and creeks throughout Santa Barbara County are responding to this rainfall exactly as you'd expect. Water levels are rising, flow rates are increasing. Streams that are usually calm and clear are running fast, muddy, and dangerous. This is not the time to go check out the rising water in person. It's not the time to try crossing a flooded roadway because it doesn't look that deep. Moving water can be more dangerous than it appears, which is why officials recommend avoiding flooded areas. It takes surprisingly little water to sweep a person off their feet. It takes even less to move a vehicle once water gets underneath it and provides lift. If you encounter a flooded road, turn around. If a creek near your home is rising, stay away from it. Moving water is surprisingly strong and can create dangerous conditions quickly. Low-lying areas are always the first to flood and the last to drain. If you live in a location that's at the bottom of a slope, in a depression, or near any kind of drainage channel, you're at higher risk during an event like this. Pay attention to what's happening around your property. Is water starting to pool in your yard? Are your storm drains backing up? Is water flowing toward your home rather than away from it? These are early warning signs that flooding might be developing. Taking action early, even simple things like moving vehicles to higher ground or preparing sandbags, can make a significant difference if flooding does occur. And here's something that people sometimes forget. Flooding doesn't always happen while it's raining. Sometimes the worst flooding occurs hours after the heaviest rain has passed, because all that water from upstream finally makes its way down to lower elevations. A river might look fine during a rainstorm and then crest hours later after the storm has moved on. So even when conditions seem to be improving, even when the rain has stopped and the sun is trying to break through, flood risks can still be high until all that water has had time to move through the system. The flood watch issued for Santa Barbara County is telling you all of this in official language. It's saying the ingredients are present for flooding to occur. It's saying you need to monitor conditions. It's saying you should be prepared to take action if flooding develops in your area. A watch is not the same as a warning. A warning means flooding is occurring or imminent. A watch means conditions are favourable. But the gap between a watch and a warning can close quickly during a multi-day storm event like this. Staying informed, checking for updates, and having a plan in case flooding does develop, these are the practical steps that turn information into safety. So when you think about the rain and flooding threat over these 5 days, think about the persistence. Think about the cumulative effect. Think about the fact that the ground can only absorb so much, drainage systems can only handle so much, and reservoirs and waterways can only hold so much before things start to overflow. This is why a 5-day rainfall event is fundamentally different from a 1 or 2 day event. It's not just more of the same, it's a qualitative shift in how the landscape responds to water. Wind often gets overshadowed by rainfall when people think about storms, but the wind component of this Santa Barbara County system is serious enough to warrant its own set of warnings. Let's break down what's happening with the wind, why it matters, and what the different warning levels mean for people in different parts of the county. First, the terminology. A high wind warning is more serious than a wind advisory. The National Weather Service issues warnings when conditions are expected to meet certain thresholds that indicate potential for damage and danger. A high wind warning means sustained winds or frequent gusts strong enough to cause property damage, down trees, and create hazardous travel conditions. A wind advisory, while less severe, still means winds will be strong enough to cause problems. The difference is in degree, not in kind. Both mean you need to pay attention and take precautions. Both mean conditions will be difficult. The warning just tells you that the difficulty level is higher. So which areas are under which level of wind threat? The coastal zones of Santa Barbara County are seeing the highest wind expectations, along with exposed mountain ridges and higher elevation areas. These locations are under the high wind warning. The reason is straightforward. There's less obstruction to block or slow the wind in these areas. Coastal locations face winds coming off the ocean with nothing to stop them. Mountain ridges and peaks are exposed to winds that accelerate as they're forced over terrain. These are the places where wind speeds will be highest and impacts will be most significant. Inland valley areas are generally under the wind advisory rather than the full warning. This doesn't mean the wind will be calm or gentle. It means the geography provides some sheltering effect that keeps wind speeds just below the warning threshold. But strong is still strong. Even an advisory level wind event means you'll notice the wind. You'll have to deal with it, and it will cause some disruption to daily activities. Let's talk about what these wind speeds actually mean in practical terms. Sustained winds are the consistent wind speed measured over a period of time. Gusts are brief, but stronger bursts that spike above the sustained speed. Both matter, but in different ways. Sustained winds create constant pressure on structures, on trees, on vehicles. They're relentless. Gusts are the moments when that pressure suddenly increases, and those are often when failures occur. A tree that's withstanding sustained winds might snap when a strong gust hits. A piece of roofing that's holding on might tear loose during a gust. Power lines that are holding steady might slap together during a gust and cause an outage or spark. The impacts of wind at these levels are predictable. Trees will come down, especially trees that are already weakened, diseased, or poorly rooted. And here's where the multi-day nature of this storm creates a compound problem. The heavy rainfall is saturating the ground, which loosens tree roots. Wet, soft soil doesn't hold roots as firmly as dry, compacted soil. So you have trees standing in saturated ground, while strong winds push against them day after day. Trees may become unstable when soil is saturated and winds are strong. Shallow-rooted species are particularly vulnerable. Trees near structures, near power lines, or near roads pose the greatest concern because when they fail, they cause secondary problems. Power outages are possible during extended wind events. Tree branches fall onto power lines. Debris blows into electrical equipment. The constant stress on the system finds weak points. Power companies prepare for this by staging crews and equipment. but restoration during the storm is difficult and sometimes impossible. If conditions are too dangerous for crews to work safely, repairs have to wait until the wind calms down. This is why a multi-day wind event often means multi-day power outages in affected areas. It's not that power companies aren't trying to fix things, it's that conditions won't let them do the work safely until the weather improves. Travel becomes hazardous when winds reach warning or advisory levels. If you're driving, and especially in a high-profile vehicle like a truck, van or SUV, the wind will push you around. You'll feel the vehicle being shoved sideways when gusts hit. Bridges and overpasses are particularly dangerous because wind accelerates through those spaces. Empty trailers can flip. RVS become difficult to control. Even regular passenger vehicles require constant attention and steering correction to stay in your lane. If you must travel during high winds, drive slower, keep both hands on the wheel, and be prepared for sudden gusts that can push your vehicle unexpectedly. Unsecured outdoor objects become projectiles in high winds. Patio furniture, trash cans, lawn decorations, umbrellas, anything that isn't tied down or heavy enough to resist wind, these items will blow around. They'll damage vehicles, break windows, or injure people if they hit at the wrong time. This is preventable. Before wind events, bring loose items inside or secure them properly. It seems like a small thing, but it makes a real difference in preventing damage and injury. The combination of wind and rain creates problems that are worse than either element alone. Rain makes surfaces slippery, wind makes standing difficult and balance harder. Together, they create conditions that make outdoor activity more difficult and risky. Rain reduces visibility, and wind makes it hard to hold an umbrella or keep rain gear in place. Wet surfaces combined with wind means slips, and falls become more likely. If you don't have to be outside during the worst of this storm, stay inside. If you do have to go out, understand that it's going to be harder and riskier than normal. Then there's the noise. Constant wind is loud. It howls around buildings. It rattles windows. It creates a background roar that goes on for hours. This isn't just an annoyance. It's a psychological stress that builds over time. When wind blows hard all day, all night, and into the next day without stopping, it wears on people. Sleep becomes difficult. Concentration becomes harder. The constant noise creates a low-level stress that you don't fully realize until it finally stops. This is one of those impacts that doesn't make headlines, but it's real, and it affects everyone dealing with the storm. Peak wind speeds are expected during the Tuesday through Thursday period, which aligns with when the overall storm system is at its strongest. Monday brings wind, but Tuesday is when things really ramp up. This means the wind threat grows as we move through the week, rather than staying constant. Conditions that are challenging on Monday become difficult on Tuesday, and especially challenging by Wednesday. This progression matters for planning. If you have outdoor work that needs to be done, if you need to secure property or move vehicles or take care of vulnerable structures, Monday is your window. Once Tuesday arrives, conditions become much harder to work in safely. The wind will eventually ease, just like the rain will eventually stop. Thursday evening into Friday is when the forecast shows winds finally calming back to normal levels. But until then, wind is a persistent threat that compounds every other problem the storm is causing. It makes flooding worse by blowing rain sideways and overwhelming drainage systems faster. It makes travel more dangerous. It increases the likelihood of power outages, and it simply makes life harder for everyone trying to deal with a difficult weather situation that's already lasting too long. Now we need to talk about what's happening in the mountains, because even if you don't live at high elevation, the winter storm watch issued for the higher terrain around Santa Barbara County tells you something important about how intense this storm system really is. When a single weather system is producing flood watches in the valleys, wind warnings along the coast, and winter storm watches in the mountains all at the same time, you're dealing with something significant. The winter storm watch activates Tuesday and runs through Thursday, which matches exactly with the peak intensity period we've been discussing. This is not a coincidence. Tuesday is when the storm's full strength arrives, and part of that strength is cold enough temperatures at higher elevations to change rain into snow. So while the valleys continue to see rainfall, the mountains will see accumulating snow, potentially in substantial amounts. Elevation is the key factor here. There's a snow level, an altitude above which precipitation falls as snow rather than rain. That snow level fluctuates with temperature changes, but during the peak of this storm it's expected to drop to levels that will bring significant snowfall to mountain passes and higher terrain. We're not talking about a dusting on the highest peaks. We're talking about snow that accumulates, that makes roads impassable. That creates winter travel conditions in areas where people might not be expecting them because they're focused on the rain and flooding concerns in lower areas. Mountain passes are critical transportation routes in California. They connect regions, they're used by commercial traffic, and they're the roads people use to travel between different parts of the state. When snow falls heavily in these passes, especially when it's accompanied by wind which creates blowing snow and reduced visibility, travel becomes difficult and sometimes impossible. Road closures happen. Chain requirements get put in place. Drivers who aren't experienced with winter conditions find themselves in dangerous situations. And because this is a multi-day storm, those conditions don't clear up after a few hours. They persist. Roads that close on Tuesday might not reopen until Thursday or Friday. The cold temperatures that come with this system are important beyond just creating snow. Cold affects how the entire storm behaves. Colder temperatures affect how the storm system behaves. Cold temperatures mean any precipitation that does fall as rain is cold rain, the kind that chills you quickly if you're out in it. Cold overnight temperatures after a day of rain and wind mean conditions are harder for people who lose power and heating. Cold combined with wet creates a specific type of misery that's harder to deal with than either element alone. So why does this matter even if you don't live in the mountains? Several reasons. First, if you need to travel anywhere that involves crossing mountain passes or using higher elevation routes, your travel plans are directly affected. That business trip, that family visit, that shipping delivery, they all depend on roads staying open. When winter storms close mountain passes, the impacts ripple across the entire region. Traffic gets rerouted to alternate routes that become congested. Delivery schedules get delayed. Travel that normally takes a few hours turns into an all-day ordeal or becomes impossible until conditions improve. Second, the mountain snowfall affects water supply in the longer term. California depends on mountain snowpack to provide water through the dry months. Snow that falls during storms like this gets stored in the mountains and melts gradually through spring and summer, feeding rivers and reservoirs. So while the immediate concern is travel disruption and hazardous conditions, there's a silver lining in that winter storms that bring mountain snow are contributing to the state's water resources. It's a complex picture. The storm causes short-term problems but provides long-term benefits. Third, mountain communities face the same challenges as valley communities, but with added complications. A power outage in the valley is inconvenient. A power outage in the mountains during a winter storm creates additional challenges. Heating becomes critical. Road access for emergency services becomes difficult. Isolation increases. People who live in mountain areas are generally well prepared for winter weather, but multi-day storm events push preparation to its limits. The Winter Storm Watch tells mountain residents that they need to be ready for snow, cold, wind, and difficult conditions that will last several days. It tells travelers that mountain routes are going to be problematic and possibly impassable during the midweek period. And it tells everyone else that this storm system has enough power and cold air associated with it to create winter conditions in the mountains while simultaneously creating flood and wind threats at lower elevations. That's a sign of a strong, well-organized storm system. Snow removal in mountain areas is a constant battle during multi-day storms. Plows work to keep roads clear, but if snow is falling faster than they can plow, roads become impassable. Avalanche concerns increase in steep terrain when heavy snow falls and wind loads it onto unstable slopes. Visibility drops to near zero during heavy snow with strong winds. These conditions require preparation and should not be taken lightly. If you live in the mountains or plan to travel through them, having supplies, having backup plans, and knowing when to stay put rather than attempt travel, these become critical safety decisions that affect your well-being. The Thursday improvement we keep mentioning applies to the mountains as well as the valleys, but winter conditions take longer to clear. Even after snow stops falling, roads still need to be ploughed, avalanche hazards still need to be assessed, ice that forms overnight needs to be dealt with. So while the valleys might see relatively quick return to normal once the storm moves on, mountain areas often face days of recovery and cleanup before conditions truly get back to normal. Temperature forecasts for this event show a noticeable drop from Monday through the peak days. It's not just that it will feel cold because of wind and rain, it actually will be cold. This affects everyone, but especially people without reliable shelter or heating, people who lose power, and people whose homes aren't well insulated. In California, where mild weather is the norm, homes often aren't built for extended periods of cold and wet. Heating systems that rarely get used might not work efficiently. Drafty windows and doors that don't matter most of the year suddenly matter a lot. The cold component of this storm is one more layer of difficulty added to an already challenging situation. When you put it all together, the winter storm watch is a reminder that this system is hitting Santa Barbara County and the surrounding region from multiple angles simultaneously. Rain in the valleys, snow in the mountains, wind everywhere. Cold temperatures affecting the entire area. This kind of multifaceted storm is what separates a routine weather event from something that requires serious attention and preparation. The mountains are getting their own version of the same storm that's causing problems at lower elevations, and those mountain impacts have consequences that reach well beyond the people who actually live in the high country. There's one threat we haven't discussed yet, and it's specific to areas that have been affected by recent wildfires. This is a threat that compounds with everything else we've covered, and in some ways this represents one of the most serious concerns during this storm. We're talking about burn scar flooding, debris flows, and the special hazards that exist when heavy rain falls on terrain that's been stripped bare by fire. Santa Barbara County and surrounding areas have experienced several significant wildfires in the recent past. The Gifford Fire and the Lake Fire. If you live in these areas or follow California news, these names are familiar to you. These weren't small fires. They burned across thousands of acres. They destroyed vegetation, consumed trees and brush, and left behind landscapes of bare soil and ash. At the time those fires were burning, the immediate concern was obvious: flames, smoke, evacuations, structures at risk. But fire creates a secondary hazard that doesn't become apparent until the rains arrive, and now the rains have arrived. Here's what happens to soil when fire burns over it. Intense heat from fire changes how soil absorbs water, creating a layer that makes water run off instead of soaking in. Natural vegetation. The plants and trees and ground cover that normally exist on hillsides, they do several critical things. Their roots hold soil in place. Their leaves and branches slow down falling rain before it hits the ground. Their presence creates friction that slows water as it runs downhill. When fire removes all of that vegetation, and when the heat alters the soil underneath, you're left with a landscape that behaves completely differently when it rains. Water that falls on a burn scar doesn't soak into the ground the way it would on normal terrain. Instead, it runs off immediately, and it runs off fast. Picture a paved parking lot during a rainstorm. Water doesn't soak into pavement, it sheets across the surface and heads downhill toward the lowest point. A burn scar behaves similarly. Rain hits the bare ground, finds no vegetation to slow it down, encounters soil that won't absorb it, and starts flowing downhill rapidly, picking up speed and gathering volume as it goes. As that water flows, it picks up everything in its path. Ash from the burned vegetation, loose soil that's no longer held in place by roots, rocks and debris, small boulders, burned tree branches. All of this material gets caught up in the flowing water and turns it from a water flow into a debris flow. This is fundamentally different from regular flooding. Regular flooding is water where it shouldn't be. A debris flow is a moving mass of mud, rocks, and debris that has the consistency of wet concrete and the power of a bulldozer. It's far more destructive than water alone. Debris flows move quickly and can develop with limited warning in burn scar areas. They have enormous power because of the solid material mixed in with the water. They can destroy structures, bury roads, trap vehicles, and pose serious risks to anyone in their path. Debris flows can develop quickly in burn scar areas. Debris flows can be triggered by rainfall on saturated burn scar terrain. But on a burn scar, it doesn't take exceptional rainfall. It just takes sustained rain falling on terrain that can't handle it anymore. This is why evacuation warnings have been issued for communities near recent burn scars. These aren't suggestions. They're not precautionary measures being taken out of an abundance of caution. They're serious warnings based on known hazards and historical precedent. California has experienced destructive debris flows from burn scars in the past. These events show why taking evacuation warnings seriously is important. Communities have been devastated. The warnings being issued now are attempts to prevent that from happening again. If you live in or near an area that burned recently, if your home is downhill from a burn scar, if your access roads run through or below burned terrain, you need to understand that you're in a special category of risk during this storm. The flood threats that everyone else faces are serious. The debris flow threats in burn scar areas require special attention and preparation. This is not the time to wait and see what happens. This is the time to follow official guidance, to have an evacuation plan ready, and to be prepared to leave immediately if conditions deteriorate or if authorities issue mandatory evacuation orders. The areas most at risk are obvious if you know the geography and recent fire history. Slopes below burn scars, canyons that drain burned watersheds, roads that run along or through recently burned areas, communities built in the foothills where fire burned right up to the edge of development. These locations combine terrain that funnels water with vegetation loss, that eliminates natural barriers. It's the worst possible setup when a major storm system moves in with days of heavy rainfall. There's a psychological challenge here that's important to recognise. For people who already survived a wildfire, who already evacuated once, who already dealt with the stress and fear and disruption that fire brings, being told to evacuate again because of rain feels unfair. It feels like too much. There's a temptation to think, we already dealt with the fire, surely the rain can't be that bad, but the data says otherwise. Burn scar debris flows have caused serious damage even when people underestimated the risk. The ground doesn't care about fairness, it responds to physics and geology. When the conditions are right for a debris flow, it happens, regardless of what anyone thinks should or shouldn't occur. Timing matters with burn scars. The danger is highest during the first major storm system to hit after a fire. That's when the ground is at its most vulnerable, when the soil changes from fire are freshest, when there's been no time for any vegetation to regrow and stabilise things. Subsequent storms are still dangerous, but the risk decreases over time as plants begin to return and soil starts to recover. This storm system, happening relatively soon after recent fires, represents that highest risk scenario. The multi-day nature of this storm makes burn scar hazards worse, just like it makes every other hazard worse. A one-day storm might dump heavy rain on a burn scar, but the duration limits the total water volume. A 5-day storm keeps adding rainfall, keeps saturating the ground, keeps increasing the total amount of water and debris that could potentially mobilise. Each day of rain adds to the risk. The peak hazard period coincides with the peak of the overall storm, Tuesday through Thursday, when rainfall rates are highest, and the cumulative effect of days of prior rain has already saturated everything. Monitoring and warnings for debris flows are challenging because they happen quickly and locally. Unlike a river that has gauges and can be monitored as it rises over hours, a debris flow can initiate and reach populated areas in minutes. Weather radar can see rain falling, but it can't tell you exactly when that rain will trigger a debris flow. This is why evacuation warnings are issued based on forecast rainfall rather than waiting for debris flows to actually start. By the time you know a debris flow is happening, it's too late to evacuate safely. You have to make the decision before the event based on the forecast and the known hazards. So if you're in a burn scar area, if you've received an evacuation warning, if local officials are telling you to prepare to leave, take that seriously. Pack important documents, medications, and essential items. Have a place to go. Keep your vehicle fueled and ready. Monitor official sources for updates, and be ready to leave quickly if the warning gets upgraded to an order or if conditions change rapidly. Your life and your family's lives are worth more than any possessions you'd be leaving behind. Debris flows are avoidable by following evacuation guidance and staying out of high-risk areas. We've covered the different threats, the timeline, the warnings, and the special hazards. Now, let's bring it all together and talk about what happens during the peak period of this storm, from Tuesday through Thursday. This is when the storm reaches its highest intensity and all hazards are most active. And if you've been wondering what the worst is still coming really means, this is it. Tuesday morning arrives with conditions that are noticeably worse than Monday. The rain intensifies from steady to heavy. Rates increase to the point where street flooding happens quickly. Visibility drops because of the thick rainfall. The wind, which was already strong on Monday, increases to damaging levels across wide areas. Gusts peak at levels that bring down trees and power lines, and temperatures drop enough that the transition to snow begins in the mountains. Tuesday is when you wake up and immediately know this is different. The sound of rain on the roof is louder, the wind rattling windows is stronger. The overall feeling in the air is heavier, more oppressive, more serious. By Tuesday afternoon, the impacts are widespread and unavoidable. Roads are flooded in multiple locations throughout Santa Barbara County. Not just the usual trouble spots, but areas that normally handle rain without problems. Water is flowing where it shouldn't be. Storm drains are overmatched. Low-lying neighbourhoods are seeing water approaching homes. Power outages are spreading as wind finds weak points in the electrical system. Trees are falling in increasing numbers. Emergency responders are busy dealing with multiple situations simultaneously. This is the day when the storm stops being something people are watching and becomes something people are actively dealing with. Tuesday night doesn't bring relief. The storm continues without pause. Rain keeps falling. Wind keeps blowing. For people trying to sleep, the noise is constant and unsettling. For those without power, the night is dark and cold. For emergency crews, the night is filled with calls for help that they're struggling to keep up with. Tuesday night is when the reality fully sets in for everyone in the affected areas. This isn't going to be over quickly. This isn't going to ease up by morning. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we're only at the midpoint. Wednesday dawns with conditions largely unchanged from Tuesday. This is the psychological difficulty of a multi-day storm. There's no break. There's no improvement to give people hope. Wednesday is essentially a repeat of Tuesday's intensity, which means another day of heavy rain, damaging winds, accumulating impacts and growing problems. Flooding that was manageable on Tuesday becomes more severe on Wednesday because the water has nowhere to go. Power outages that affected some people on Tuesday spread to more areas on Wednesday. Road closures multiply. Mountain passes remain shut. The list of storm-related problems grows longer with each passing hour. Wednesday afternoon is likely the absolute peak of the storm system. This is when forecast models show the heaviest rainfall rates. This is when winds are at their strongest. This is when the winter storm in the mountains is most intense. Wednesday afternoon is forecast to bring the most intense conditions of the 5-day period. This is the moment when all the atmospheric ingredients align perfectly for the storm to show its full strength. And this is when the most serious impacts occur, the worst flooding, the most widespread power outages, the most challenging travel conditions, the highest likelihood of debris flows in burn scar areas. But here's what's important to understand. Even though Wednesday afternoon is the peak, Wednesday evening still brings difficult conditions. The peak passing doesn't mean the storm ends. It means things can't get worse than this, but they're still bad. Wednesday evening is still a time for staying safe, staying informed, and dealing with whatever impacts have developed throughout the day. It's not a time for going out to assess damage or trying to travel if you've been sheltering in place. The storm is still active. The dangers are still present. Thursday morning begins the transition period. You might start to notice that the rain doesn't seem quite as heavy as it was on Wednesday. The wind gusts aren't quite as violent. There's a subtle shift in the character of the storm. It's starting to weaken. It's beginning to lose its grip on the region. This is good news, but it's gradual good news. Thursday morning still means rain. It still means wind. It still means flooded roads and power outages and all the problems that have been building for days. The transition has started, but the storm hasn't left yet. Thursday afternoon shows more obvious improvement. Rain tapers from heavy to moderate. Wind calms from damaging to merely breezy. The cloud layer might start to break up slightly, allowing brief glimpses of lighter sky. For people who have been dealing with this storm since Saturday, these small improvements feel enormous. The psychological weight starts to lift. Hope returns. The sense that this will actually end at some point becomes real rather than theoretical. Thursday evening is when most people will finally feel like the worst is over. The rain might continue as light showers, but the heavy downpours are finished. The wind is still present. But it's no longer threatening to tear things apart. Conditions are improving steadily now rather than just holding steady or getting worse. Emergency crews can finally work more safely on restoration efforts. People can start to venture out and see what damage occurred. The focus begins to shift from weathering the storm to recovering from it. Friday brings the clear end. The storm system moves on. The rain stops completely or nearly so. The wind returns to normal. The sun might even break through, though the ground will remain saturated and rivers will still run high from all the rainfall that's accumulated over the past 5 days. Friday is when life starts to return to normal, when people begin cleanup, when power restoration efforts make real progress, when flooded roads finally drain and reopen. But Friday also reveals the full scope of what just occurred. You see the fallen trees, you see the flood damage, you see how high the water got in areas near creeks and rivers. You understand why the warnings were issued and why the preparation was necessary. So when we talk about Tuesday through Thursday as the peak impact period, we're talking about 3 full days of intense, sustained, multifaceted storm impacts. 3 days where the weather dominates everything. 3 days where normal life is disrupted and safety becomes the primary concern. 3 days where the storm system shows what it's really capable of. And 3 days that will be remembered by everyone who experiences them as a significant weather event. The kind that happens occasionally but leaves an impression that lasts. This is what Monday is building toward. This is what the warnings are preparing people for. This is why waiting until Tuesday to start taking the storm seriously would be too late. The time to prepare is now, while conditions are still manageable. The time to understand what's coming is before it arrives. And the time to make decisions about safety, about travel, about whether to stay or evacuate if you're in a high-risk area, that time is running out as Monday progresses into evening. Forecasts are based on current information and will be updated as conditions develop. But the consistency of forecast models, the agreement among meteorologists, and the official warnings from the National Weather Service all point to the same conclusion. Tuesday through Thursday will be difficult. They will require extra caution in vulnerable areas. They will require patience, preparation, and respect for the power of nature. And they will eventually pass, leaving behind a community that weathered a significant storm together. We've covered a lot of information here, and if you've stayed with me through all of it, you now understand what's happening in Santa Barbara County, why it matters, and what's still to come. Let's bring this together with some final thoughts about how to approach the next few days. This is a serious weather event. Let's be clear about that without being fearful. 5 consecutive days of rain, wind, and cold, with multiple official warnings from the National Weather Service, with peak impacts arriving midweek. This is not routine winter weather. It's significant. It demands attention. But it's also manageable if you're informed and prepared. People in California deal with storms. Communities have systems in place to respond. You have information now that helps you understand what to expect and when to expect it. That information is your most important tool. Preparation at this point means different things depending on your situation. If you're in a flood-prone area, make sure you know your evacuation routes and have a plan for where you'd go if flooding develops. If you're in a burn scar zone and have received evacuation warnings, take them seriously and be ready to leave quickly. If you're in an area facing high winds, secure outdoor objects and trim back any tree branches that pose a threat to structures or power lines. If you depend on electricity for medical equipment or have special needs, have backup plans in place in case power goes out for an extended period. These aren't panic measures. They're common sense steps that reduce risk and make a difficult situation more manageable. Staying informed is critical over the next several days. Conditions will change hour by hour. Warnings might be upgraded. New hazards might develop. The National Weather Service website is your authoritative source for official information. Local news stations provide updates specific to your area. Emergency management agencies issue evacuation orders and safety guidance. Social media can provide real-time reports from your neighbours, though be cautious about unverified information. Check multiple sources. Stay updated. Don't assume that what's true Monday morning is still true Tuesday afternoon. If you lose power, and there's a good chance that many people will during the storm, be prepared to be without electricity for more than just a few hours. Have flashlights with fresh batteries. Have a way to charge your phone, whether that's a car charger or a portable battery pack. Have food that doesn't require cooking. Have layers of clothing and blankets to stay warm if your heating goes out. Have a battery-powered radio so you can receive emergency information even without internet or television. These basic preparations make a power outage inconvenient rather than dangerous. Travel during the peak of this storm from Tuesday through Thursday should be avoided if at all possible. If you don't need to be on the road, stay home. Let emergency vehicles and utility crews do their work without adding to the traffic and complications. If you absolutely must travel, give yourself extra time. Drive slowly. Be prepared for flooded roads and downed trees. And have supplies in your vehicle in case you get stuck or stranded. Never attempt to drive through flooded roadways, even if they don't look deep. More people die in floods from driving into water than from any other cause. Turn around, don't drown. It's a cliché because it's true, and it saves lives. Check on your neighbours, especially those who are elderly, who live alone, or who might have difficulty preparing for or dealing with a storm. Community resilience is built on people looking out for each other. A quick knock on the door to ask if someone needs anything, a phone call to make sure someone knows about the warnings, an offer to help secure outdoor items or share supplies. These small actions make a real difference. Storms are easier to handle when communities face them together rather than everyone dealing with problems in isolation. For those of you watching from outside the affected area, share this information with anyone you know in Santa Barbara County or surrounding regions. Make sure friends and family understand what's coming. Check in on them over the next few days. Offer support. Sometimes just knowing that people care and are thinking about you makes difficult situations feel less overwhelming. This storm will end. By Friday, conditions will be improving. By the weekend, the weather will return to normal. The recovery will take longer than the storm itself in some areas. Flood damage doesn't repair itself instantly. Power restoration takes time, debris cleanup happens gradually. But the acute phase of this event, the dangerous weather itself, has a defined endpoint. We'll get through this. I'll be continuing to monitor this situation and providing updates as conditions develop. If there are significant changes to the forecast, if new warnings are issued, if the storm behaves differently than expected, I'll let you know. Weather coverage doesn't end just because one video is finished. This is an evolving situation, and I'm committed to keeping you informed throughout. So here's what I want you to do right now. If this video gave you valuable information, if you feel better prepared because you watched it, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you get future updates about this storm and other weather events that affect your area. And most importantly, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Santa Barbara County dealing with this storm directly? Are you nearby? Are you watching from somewhere else but concerned about people in the area? I want to hear from you. I want to know how you're doing. We're all in this together. Stay safe over the next few days. Stay informed. Take care of yourselves and each other. And remember, weather is powerful, but preparation and information are powerful too. You've got this.